I know the difference between a solid investment and a sinkhole. 31 years as a certified public accountant will do that to you. You learn to read the numbers before the numbers read you. You learn which columns are growing and which ones are bleeding out quietly in the margins where nobody looks. You learn that the most dangerous losses are the ones that happen so slowly, you almost don't notice them until the day you sit down at your desk, open the ledger, and realize there is nothing left. That is how I would describe my marriage, my relationship with my son, my life, for the better part of a decade. A slow, quiet bleed that I kept patching with my own savings, my own silence, my own willingness to believe that the people I loved most would one day look at me the way I looked at them. They never did. But I am getting ahead of myself. My name is Walter. I am 63 years old. I spent my career building something real. A small but respected accounting firm in Asheville, North Carolina. Nothing flashy, just honest work, honest numbers, and a reputation that took 20 years to build, and that I was proud of every single day I walked through that door. When I sold the firm at 61, I had enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, travel when I wanted, and still leave something meaningful behind for the people I loved. My wife and I had been married for 34 years. We had one son together. He was 32. At the time, all of this happened. He had married a woman 3 years earlier, a woman I tried very hard to like and failed at in ways I am not entirely proud of. Not because she was a bad person in the way that villains are bad in the movies. She was bad in the way that certain financial instruments are bad, complicated on the surface, fundamentally designed to extract value from whoever holds them, and nearly impossible to explain to someone who hasn't studied the fine print. My son changed after he married her. Gradually, at first, then all at once, the way Hemingway said bankruptcy happens. He stopped calling unless he needed something. He stopped visiting unless there was a reason. And the reasons were always, in one way or another, financial. There was the down payment on their house in Charlotte, $80,000, which I gave because my son sat across from me at my kitchen table and told me it was an investment in the family's future. There was my daughter-in-law's catering business, which I funded to the tune of $42,000 over 18 months, watching it dissolve in real time while she told me it just needed more capital. There was the car my son absolutely had to have a lease he could not afford on his own, which somehow became my responsibility because, as he explained to me with a patience that I found quietly insulting, I had more money than I needed. My wife and I want to be careful here, because I spent a long time trying to understand her rather than condemn her. My wife did not contradict any of it. She had grown close to my daughter-in-law in the way that I think some women grow close to the daughters they never had. She planned lunches with her. She went on weekend trips with her. She began, slowly, to see things the way my daughter-in-law saw them. And the way my daughter-in-law saw things was that I was a resource to be managed, rather than a husband to be loved. I noticed it. I am an accountant. I notice everything. But I told myself I was being ungenerous. I told myself I was reading the numbers wrong, that there was a column I was missing, that the story would balance out in the end. Then came the Saturday in October. I had been having chest pains for about a week. Not dramatic, not the fist through the sternum kind you see in the movies, just a pressure, a tightness that came and went, mostly in the morning, that I had been meaning to call my doctor about and kept postponing because I had always been healthy, and I suppose I believed that health, like a good reputation, was something you kept once you had it. That Saturday, my son and daughter-in-law were hosting what they called a milestone party. My daughter-in-law had turned 30, and my son had decided to celebrate it over an entire weekend at a rented lake house in Lake Norman, about 2 hours from Asheville. My wife had driven down the day before to help set up. I had declined to go early, telling them I would drive down Saturday morning. The truth was, I did not want to be there at all. The truth was, I had been dreading it for 3 weeks. But I was going to go. Because I am the kind of man who shows up. I never made it to the car. I was in the kitchen around 7 in the morning, drinking coffee, when the pressure in my chest stopped being pressure, and became something else entirely. Something that had weight and direction and intention. My left arm went numb from the shoulder down. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs had simply stopped cooperating with my plans for them. I managed to get to my phone. I called 911. I remember lying on the tile, the coffee mug tipped over on the counter, thinking with the calm detachment of a man who has spent his life working with cold numbers, I might actually die on this floor. The paramedics arrived in 11 minutes. I know because I counted. At the hospital, after the tests, a cardiologist I had never met sat down beside my bed and explained to me, with the practiced gentleness of someone who has delivered this particular news many times, that I had experienced a significant cardiac event. Not a full heart attack, a severe warning. The kind that precedes a full event if ignored. He told me I would need to stay for observation. Possibly 2 to 3 days. Possibly longer, depending on what the additional testing showed. He asked me if there was someone he should call. I gave him my wife's number. She did not answer. He left a voicemail. He tried again 20 minutes later. She answered. I was not on the call. But one of the nurses, a woman named Denise, who I will be grateful to for the rest of my life, was in the room when the doctor stepped out to make the call. And she told me what happened. She told me because she thought I should know. I think she was right. My wife listened. The doctor explained the situation. He used the phrase, serious cardiac event. He used the phrase, we'd like his family present. And then my wife said, and I want you to understand that I am not exaggerating. I am not dramatizing. I am reporting the numbers exactly as they were recorded. My wife said, we're in the middle of a party. Can this wait until tomorrow? The doctor said he strongly recommended she come as soon as possible. My wife said, it's a 2-hour drive, and we've already started. Tell him I'll be there in the morning. Then she hung up. Denise stood at the foot of my bed and looked at me with an expression that told me she was trying to find something kind to say and could not locate it. I told her she did not need to say anything. I told her I appreciated her telling me. She squeezed my hand and left the room. I lay in that hospital bed in the dark for a long time. I am an accountant. I do not spiral. I do not catastrophize. I look at the numbers, and the numbers, laid out plainly in front of me in that hospital room, were these. My wife had been informed that her husband of 34 years was in the hospital following a cardiac event. She had chosen to stay at a birthday party. She had not asked to be transferred to my room. She had not said she was on her way. She had said it could wait until morning. My son never called at all. My daughter-in-law, I learned later through Denise, had actually taken the phone from my wife at some point after the doctor's call and made a comment to someone nearby, not knowing the call was still partially connected, that this was typical Walter, always finding a way to make things about himself. My son, according to what my wife told me later, with a casualness that still takes my breath away, had said, he's probably fine. Dad's tough. They arrived at the hospital the next morning at 11:15. My wife walked in carrying a coffee cup from a drive-thru and said, see, you're fine. I told you it could wait. I looked at her. I looked at my son, standing behind her in a sweatshirt, scrolling his phone. I looked at my daughter-in-law, who gave me the particular smile of a person performing concern for an audience. I said, yes, I'm fine, and I started planning. I want to be clear about something. I did not plan out of anger. Anger is a bad basis for any important decision. I have seen it destroy more financial plans than market crashes. I planned out of clarity. I planned the way I used to plan an audit, methodically, without sentiment, following the numbers wherever they led. My first call, the morning after they left the hospital, was to my attorney, a man named Gerald, who had handled my business affairs for 15 years, and who had the particular quality I have always admired in lawyers and accountants alike. He did not judge the situation, he just helped me navigate it. I told Gerald I needed to make changes. Significant ones. He asked me how significant. My second call was to my financial advisor. I instructed him to begin the process of restructuring my accounts. My wife and I had joint accounts, and I want to be careful here. because there are legal processes involved in separating marital assets, and I followed every one of them correctly. I am an accountant. I do not cut corners. But I began the process of understanding exactly what was mine, what was jointly held, and what my rights and obligations were under North Carolina law. My third call, which I made from a bench outside the hospital while waiting for a follow-up consultation, was to a real estate agent I had known for years. Her name was Patricia. I asked her what my house was worth. She told me. The number was considerably higher than I had expected. I thanked her and told her I might be in touch. The house I am referring to was a 5-bedroom colonial in the Grove Park neighborhood that I had purchased in 1998, renovated twice, and maintained with the same care I gave everything I owned. My son had grown up in that house. He had, on multiple occasions over the preceding 2 years, made references casual, laughing references, the kind designed to be deniable to how nice it would be to eventually have the house in the family, how his daughter, my granddaughter, whom I adored, would love growing up there one day. He assumed it was his future. He had never once asked if that was what I wanted. He had simply decided, the way he had decided so many things, that my assets were a resource to be scheduled, rather than a decision to be earned. I spent 3 weeks recovering and thinking. I walked every morning. I ate well. I slept. I spoke to Gerald twice a week. I spoke to my financial advisor once a week. I did not speak to my wife much at all. And when I did, I kept things pleasant and surface level, the way you do when you are in the middle of a careful audit and you do not want the subject to know they are being examined. My wife, for her part, seemed to believe everything had returned to normal. She went to lunch with my daughter-in-law on Thursdays. She made dinner. She asked me how my follow-up appointments were going with the same tone she used to ask what I wanted from the grocery store. Routine. Functional. My son called once during those 3 weeks. He called to tell me that his daughter, my granddaughter, who was 4 years old and the single purest source of joy in my life, had started taking swimming lessons and was doing really well. He talked for 11 minutes. He did not ask once how I was feeling. He did not mention the hospital. When I said, at the end of the call, I've been thinking about some changes, he laughed and said, yeah, the doctor probably wants you eating better. Huh, Dad? And said he had to go. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment after he hung up. Then I called Gerald and told him to proceed. The process took 6 weeks. I will not bore you with every legal and financial detail, but I will tell you the broad shape of it, because I think the shape matters. I filed for divorce. Gerald walked me through the equitable distribution process under North Carolina law. My wife was entitled to her fair share of the marital assets, and she received it. I was not trying to punish her financially. I was simply done. The house, as the primary marital asset, was listed for sale. The proceeds would be divided according to what Gerald negotiated. Patricia, my real estate agent, moved quickly. There were 3 offers within 10 days. I updated my will. I had previously left the bulk of my estate to my wife and son. I removed them both. In their place, I established a trust for my granddaughter Ironclad, managed by Gerald as trustee, accessible to her when she turned 25. I made a substantial donation to the cardiac care unit at Mission Hospital in Asheville, where Denise had squeezed my hand in the dark and told me the truth when she did not have to. I restructured the remainder into a private charitable foundation bearing my firm's name. My son was not named anywhere in the new document. My wife received only what North Carolina law entitled her to. My daughter-in-law received nothing, which was already the case, but I want to note it for the record. I moved out of the house on a Tuesday. I had arranged to stay temporarily in a furnished apartment near downtown. While the sale was finalized, I left a letter on the kitchen table. I did not write it in anger. I wrote it the way I would write a final report to a client, factual, complete. I told my wife that I had loved her and that I believed she had once loved me. But that love, like any other asset, depreciates when it is not maintained, and ours had been depreciating for a long time. I told her that I had chosen to take the cardiac event as the information it was, rather than the inconvenience she had treated it as. I told her the house was sold pending final closing, and that Gerald would be in contact with her attorney regarding the equitable division. I told her she was welcome to keep the coffee maker. I told my son, in a separate letter I had Gerald mail to his Charlotte address, that I had changed my estate planning. I did not tell him the details. I told him that the house he had been expecting to inherit was sold. I told him that I wished him and his family well, genuinely, and that the door was not permanently closed, but that it would require more than assumptions to open it. I found out later, through Gerald, what happened when my wife discovered the letter and the empty house. She called my son immediately. He drove to Asheville that same afternoon, which was interesting given that 2 hours had been too far when I was in the hospital. They went room to room in the house. They called Patricia, my real estate agent, who confirmed the sale. My daughter-in-law, according to my son's later account delivered in a voicemail he left me that I have listened to exactly once, had what he described as a meltdown in the living room. She had, apparently, already been telling people at a dinner party 2 weeks prior that they were getting the Grove Park house. She had already been discussing renovation ideas with a designer friend of hers. There was no house. There was no inheritance. There were the contents of a letter and the quiet testimony of an empty room. My son's voicemail went through several phases in the span of about 4 minutes. It started with confusion, moved to hurt, moved to anger, moved briefly back to something that sounded almost like genuine regret, and then moved to demands. He wanted to talk. He wanted to meet. He said I was being dramatic. He said I was punishing them for one mistake. He said the hospital thing had been blown out of proportion. He said, and I want to make sure I heard this correctly because I have replayed this particular moment, he said, that I had to understand they were in the middle of celebrating something important. I listened to the voicemail in my new apartment, a cup of coffee in my hand, looking out at the mountains through the window. Then, I set my phone down and finished my coffee. I did not call back that day. I called back 3 weeks later, once I had found my footing in the new apartment. Once the divorce paperwork was progressing. Once I had seen my granddaughter twice at a neutral location, a park, on a Saturday, just the two of us, and her swimming lesson stories, and confirmed that whatever happened between me and her parents, she and I were going to be fine. I told my son that I loved him. That had not changed. I told him I was not interested in relitigating the decisions he and his wife had made, or my wife had made, or that I had made for 34 years. I told him the decisions going forward were what mattered. I told him that the trust for his daughter was real and solid, and would be there when she needed it, regardless of anything else. I told him that if he wanted a relationship with me, that door was open. But it would be a relationship between equals, not a financial arrangement dressed up as love. There was a long silence on the phone. He said, "Dad, I didn't know it was that bad." I said, "I know you didn't." I said, "That's exactly what I'm talking about. It has been 14 months since that conversation. I am not going to tell you that everything is resolved, because it is not. My son and I speak once every few weeks. It is careful, somewhat formal, the way two people talk when they are rebuilding something. And they both know it, and they are being honest about how long it takes. My daughter-in-law does not call. That is fine. My wife and I finalized the divorce 7 months ago. She moved to Charlotte, closer to my son and daughter-in-law. I wish her well, and I mean it. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment that I have filled with books and good furniture, and a view that I find restorative in a way that 5-bedroom colonial never quite was, because it was always, on some level, a house I was maintaining for other people's futures, rather than a home I was living in myself. I have a standing Saturday with my granddaughter. We have been to the aquarium. We have made pancakes. She told me last month that she is going to be a marine biologist. And I told her I thought that was an excellent allocation of her talents. She laughed and told me I talk funny. I told her she was probably right. I am back to walking every morning, 4 miles along the river trail. My cardiologist, who is a cautiously optimistic man, Tells me my numbers are very good for someone my age. I told him I have spent my whole career reading numbers, and I intended to make these particular ones work in my favor. He smiled at that. I think about the man I was before that Saturday in October. The man who lay on the kitchen floor, listening to his own heartbeat and thinking about all the columns he had refused to look at for too long. I do not have contempt for that man. He was doing what people do when they love someone. He was finding ways to believe the story was still going to balance. But here is what 31 years of looking at real numbers will teach you. Hope is not an accounting method. Wishful thinking does not close a deficit. And the most expensive thing a person can own is a relationship they keep funding past the point where the returns justify the investment. I am 63 years old. I live in a city I love. I have a granddaughter who will one day have resources I built for her, rather than resources she expected from me. I wake up in the morning to a view of the mountains and I drink my coffee without checking whether someone is going to tell me it can wait until tomorrow. It took a hospital floor and a silent phone and a nurse named Denise to teach me that the life I had been balancing so carefully was not the one I actually wanted. I am grateful for the lesson. I am sorry it took so long to learn it, but I am here. I am healthy. And for the first time, in longer than I can tell you, the numbers finally add up.